The biggest scientific breakthroughs have happened in the last 2 years. We have finally learned how to integrate sub-nanometer chips into vaccines, helping governments around the world achieve full GPS tracking of their populations. The telecommunications industry has made significant advances in their 5G technology in order to amplify and transmit COVID-19 to support the vaccine rollout. But perhaps the most important development is represented by all of you in this room, mRNA. This miracle concoction has enabled the mutation of your Illuminati lizard DNA to transform it into human-like creatures, able to scan into the venue with your Leave Home Safe app. And if you don't believe me, you need to do your own research. My name is Jonathan, and I am the founder of brand strategy consultancy Unsensible, and we work with biotech and pharma companies just like yours to build brands in a world that frankly mistrusts science. So in the next 14 minutes, I'm hoping to be misquoted by QAnon and get the most views Brink has ever had at any conference. And although I'm kidding, Bloomberg, you can misquote me anytime. What we've seen, particularly over the last 2 years, is that no matter how good the science or the corpus of evidence, the so-called sensible approaches to communications don't work. Using facts, data, and evidence ignores the truth that, as humans, we will die in the zombie apocalypse because we simply don't act based on rational thought and sound research. My flippant cynicism earlier, purely for your entertainment, belies the preponderance of research that suggests humans are emotional, impulsive, and need to feel first and think later. This becomes very apparent when you consistently track viral stories and analyze what makes them stick like we do. So indulge me for a minute and let me bring you into our world. Let me introduce you to how we think about what we call the problem, the common mistake, and the right mindset, which, if you take these things into account, will help you create impactful stories. So first up, let's look at these two statements. On the left, we have scientists are pioneering new medical and agricultural solutions using RNA so that they can introduce genetic code that helps living things fend off diseases and threats. And then on the right, the government, media, and financial worlds in the US are controlled by a group of satanic worshipping pedophiles who run a global child sex trafficking operation. On the left, you have a groundbreaking, fact-based assertion, and on the right, a baseless claim. And based on the title of this presentation, you probably could guess that the left refers to science, RNA to be exact, and the right is from QAnon. So which one of these do you think would get more traction? I think everyone in this room would agree that the statement on the left has far-reaching impact and something that everyone should care about. It'd be easy to assume that this would spread based on its merits alone. But remember, this sensible approach doesn't work. What we see on the right, it's not rooted in fact. It's not changing the world. At least we didn't expect it to change the world. But it's a story. And it caught fire. So much so that the New York Times reported within the past year that QAnon is now as popular in the US as some major religions. Our own internal narratives color our perceptions, beliefs, and reactions to so-called hard sciences. This seems like an extreme example, but QAnon's narratives are a large part of US politics, and they impact everything that brands do, that society does, right? Everything from branding, content, and regulatory affairs. So many of you here today are looking to, with some luck and good management, list on the NASDAQ and perhaps grow in the US and beyond. So how best should you deal with this? The first step is to understand what you're getting yourself into. Now, you can't boil the ocean. You can't deal with every rumor that some nutcase wants to tweet. What you do need to do is pay attention to the ones that will gain traction. You need to some kind of a structure that helps you triage and identify narratives that might impact a regulatory listing, your price at listing, and that's tricky without a methodology. So here's what I propose. Turn it into an equation. So let's call it P equals B times V. A narrative's potential for impact, P, equals its believability, B, times its virality, V. So P equals B times V. To do this at scale, we work with a partner called Limbic, and they have a digital solution developed in collaboration with the Department of Homeland Security. The tool recognizes, based on artificial intelligence, narratives that are developing in real time and reports back so that they can be countered. Obviously, Homeland Security's interest in this is the impact of foreign interference in their pandemic response and their domestic affairs. But we're interested in the data that tells us how does this impact the positioning of our clients' brands, and how do we avoid issues? Without disclosing specific clients, I can tell you that if you are an Asian biotech company looking to enter the US, at the moment there are about 6 highly dangerous and xenophobic narratives active in the American media. And you will need to counter and overcome these narratives. And they range from the coronavirus to collusion between the Chinese and Big Pharma. If you're interested in seeing a report, feel free to drop me an email and I'll be sure that you get one. But let's take a look at why QAnon is so effective. How is it that a groundbreaking scientific announcement might not light the same fire as something completely fabricated? In a piece by Time magazine talking about QAnon, despite the unfulfilled prophecies, they write, "Belief doesn't need to be reasonable. Even when Q believers are presented with the crushing proof that they've been fooled, they still believe, often taking the proof that they're wrong as the proof that they're right." I use QAnon as an example because it's something we're all familiar with. And from a storytelling perspective, it's been interesting to watch it grow. Disturbing, but interesting. But the fact is, QAnon supporters aren't much different from you or I. We self-narrate, distorting information so that it fits our beliefs. When we understand first that this happens, we can become more effective storytellers. But why does this happen? Well, for the last 150,000 years of evolution, our brains have been hardwired to think in stories. It helps us learn, make sense of, and remember information. We didn't have USB keys to warn us of saber-toothed cats. Because of this, we turn any incoming piece of information into a story before it reaches our conscious mind. This process is actually called a neural story net. Psychologists have developed a term called the make sense mandate, which acts like a filter on the neural story net. Now, this is where we run into what we call the problem. The make sense mandate causes people to distort incoming information in order for it to make sense within their own belief systems. When we start to understand this, we start to understand why both QAnon and all of us at times react in an unsensible manner. We're all self-narrating. The story we see and hear is often not the story that was said. This is what makes people unreliable witnesses. So as storytellers, brands, or those who invested in brands, how do you combat this distorting of information in order to communicate more effectively? So let me make a proposal. We study storytelling across many different domains. A very interesting guy, Kendall Haven, an expert on storytelling, specifically where the science intersects with the storytelling. He's done fascinating research into this area. A lot of it was in partnership with DARPA and the US government. What he discovered was applying effective story structure into your information minimizes the distortion. So in his experiments, he identified 8 essential elements. You've probably seen some versions of these lists, but the key point, and I'm going to mark this very clearly, is, in my view, is if you don't give your audience a story, their neural story net will create one of its own. So by providing these elements, we're able to begin controlling engagement, feeding essential information into the neural story net, taking control of the make sense mandate, and creating emotional involvement. But there is what we call the common mistake. People assuming that all that's required, perhaps, is providing the content. But it's not just providing the content. A story is not just content. You've got a load of agencies and people out there telling you, just create content. Content alone does not reach the level of influence. Because once the audience receives these pieces of content, they assemble it into their own stories. They, in their own mind, they're looking for, what is this story about and how does it really involve me? What does it do for me? They're looking for how bad or good the ending of the story is for the characters involved. Who can take blame and who can take credit for the ending? And if the ending was bad, who had the power to change it? The answers to these questions will dictate how that person reacts to a story. And it's that residual emotion that the person feels as a result of these answers that end up being the single greatest factor driving influence. So remember, either you provide this information or they will self-narrate and synthesize the information into a story that makes sense for them. So here's what we need to do. We need to approach the story with the right mindset and think about how we want to organize the content. Now, when I talk about organizing the content of a story, you might think about placing these 8 essential elements into one of the many story structures out there built around contention, climax, and resolution. That's a part of it. But it's important to understand that it's only a framework. Story is the way we hang the content onto that framework. And that's what we mean by organizing the content. So to figure out how to do this, we answer 3 key questions. The questions are, what is it you want to get across? How do you want the audience to position themselves in the story? And then how do you want to be perceived in the story? When you start thinking about story in this way, that's when it becomes a tool for planning. So here's an example. The science example I shared at the beginning of the presentation comes from a study by one of our BioTech clients. They conducted a piece of research to understand how to best communicate RNA. And as expected, this piece did poorly. So we ask ourselves, Why is this piece of communication ineffective? According to what we've just discussed here, there are 2 points. First, and this is a really common mistake, the communication is an important piece of information that just presents facts, but it does nothing to control the viewer's engagement or the make sense mandate. Remember, they want to make sense of it in their own context. So despite being true, the viewer is left to distort the information into whatever the story they want to tell themselves is. Second, the audience isn't factored into the equation at all. Rather, they're participating as a bystander while the brand hero is itself. So let's flip this by using these 3 questions. Number 1, what is it we want to get across? So we want people to understand why RNA solutions are beneficial to the world and how they are key to solving some of the greatest threats we face on this planet. Environment, famine, pesticides. Second, how do we want the audience to position themselves in this story? Well, we want the audience, being the governments and public, to be the motivating factor driving change for the betterment of the world and its people. As an analogy, they are the driver at the wheel of the car. So that instead of being a passive bystander, they're the hero of our story. And third, how do we want the audience to perceive us if we're a biotech company selling RNA solutions? Well, we want them to see us as a resource they can tap into to solve these issues. So in the analogy, we're the fuel that's added to the car so that they can drive it and move society forward. With that in mind, the way I would rewrite this story would be, without bees, our food resources would be depleted, and disease is threatening their existence. Amazingly, their own genetic information holds a solution. And with RNA technology, we're learning how to use that to unlock a cure. This is just one example, but it can apply on multiple levels, from reframing individual stories to pieces of content and full campaigns and brand positioning. So I want to leave you here today with a challenge. In the next 24 hours, if you go away and look at your current brand positioning or a piece of content you've been working on, I want you to rewrite it based on what we've seen here today. If you need a copy of the recording or the presentation, please ask the good Brink people to give it to you. But send it to us. Send your rewrite in the next 24 hours, and one of my team members will take a look and we can help you, give you feedback on that rewrite, free of charge. But you have to do it within the next 24 hours. And I'm going to be on holidays, so you're going to get an out of office from me, so someone from my team will pick it up. But I'll leave you on that note. Thank you very much for your time today. I'm sorry I can't be there to answer questions in person. Some of my team members are here or will be at drinks afterwards. Go see them, and I hope to see you next time.